Mississippi is breaking new ground for business at a historic pace. Amazon, XAI, Toyota, Milwaukee Tool, and GE Aerospace have all tapped into our deep talent pool, prime geographic location, and welcoming communities. This is bigger than megasites. Mississippi offers a thriving business ecosystem with affordability, greater collaboration with energy partners, and record-breaking speed to market. Looking to expand? Break new ground at mississippi.org.
Yay Networks.
When we talk about metabolism, it's always diet and exercise, but metabolism is so much more than that. It affects everything about how our bodies work. And actually, it also doesn't work the way we think it does.
A quick note before we dive into today's podcast. If you like what you hear, I would love for you to subscribe to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, wherever you download your podcast. It would also be incredible if you take a minute to rate and review this podcast. Those things do matter, and they really help us. I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. We're talking about metabolism in this week's podcast, and specifically new science that sheds even more light and gives us even more insight into our body's metabolisms, how they work, and really a lot of what we have assumed to be fact about our metabolism, why this doesn't seem to be the case at all. And if you've listened to this podcast before, Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, you know that I love this. I love what I do. I love the nutrition work, the wellness work. I love hosting this podcast because I'm always learning new stuff. And this week is no different. As I was interviewing our guest for this week, Dr. Herman Pontzer, I was just riveted at the way that he takes science and explains it in such an easy to digest way and adds these layers of really just entertaining anecdotes, very visual, very colorful stories that go with it that really help us feel like we really have an understanding, almost as if we're there. We can kind of see how this unfolds. So I loved every second of recording this episode for y'all, and I can't wait for you to hear it. I can't wait for you to learn and to have the insight from Dr. Pontzer as well. So here's what we're looking at for this episode. Dr. Herman Pontzer is the lead researcher of this pivotal study on metabolism that was published just this past fall in the journal Science. And the study, it challenges so much of what we've assumed to be fact about our metabolism. Things like the assumption that our metabolisms slow down after our 20s, that menopause slows our metabolisms. And we will uncover the myths, the perceptions that so many of us have just really held close, and we've believed it as truth. And we'll explore the findings of this research on energy metabolism. And when we say that this was a tremendous study, a pivotal study, it's gigantic. It included more than 80 different researchers really compiling and working in a very collaborative nature to combine data. They tracked nearly 6,500 people, 6,500 people from infancy into their 90s, and did metabolic research on these people that spanned over the course of 40 years. And we'll be looking at what this means for us on an individual level. We'll also be talking a little bit about Dr. Pontzer's new book. It's called Burn. It's about metabolism, but it is very specifically not a weight loss book. It's more of an exploration into the science of metabolism, really even a deeper explanation, kind of building upon what you'll hear us talking about today. It's also quite possibly the most entertaining metabolic research that I've ever read. So first, a bit about Dr. Pontzer. Herman Pontzer is an associate professor of evolutionary anthropology at Duke University, and he's an associate research professor of global health at the Duke Global Health Institute. He's an internationally recognized researcher in human energetics and evolution. And over the past 2 decades of research that he's done in the field and in the lab, Dr. Pontzer has conducted path-breaking studies across a range of settings. He's done field work with a hunter-gatherer community in northern Tanzania. He's done field work on chimpanzee ecology in the rainforest of Uganda and metabolic measurements of great apes in zoos and sanctuaries around the globe. And Dr. Pontzer's work has been covered in the New York Times, BBC, PBS, Washington Post, NPR, and so many more. So welcome, Dr. Pontzer. I'm grateful for you carving out time out of your schedule to talk through this with us today.
I'm so happy to be here.
You've done a lot, and you have an interesting background. We'll be talking about several different things. You have multiple studies that just came out, but the one that I reached out to you about is the study on metabolism that came out last fall. And, a lot of the things that we've assumed to be fact about our metabolism, you're kind of finding that's really not the case. So we'll talk about that. I want to talk about your book, Burn, which is about metabolism. And then also just like you've had really cool experiences. When we talk about, researching metabolism, you're deep in it. Like you're getting your hands dirty with this. So as in your intro, we described you as, an evolutionary anthropologist. Talk to us about that. What is evolutionary anthropology, just to help our listeners understand that?
Sure. So evolutionary anthropologists want to understand how the human body evolved. And, people take that in different directions, but I've been really interested in how that deep evolutionary history that we have, that we all share, how it shapes our bodies today and affects everything from day-to-day life to how we stay healthy. And so, there's a deep evolutionary history in our bones, in our DNA, and it shapes everything about our physiology, how our bodies take in food and burn those calories off, how it prioritizes different tasks. All the tasks your body has to accomplish each day to stay alive and to thrive. And so, understanding how that energy comes in and how that energy is used has been the focus of my research for the past 20 years or so now.
Yeah, walk us through a little bit of your path to get here, a little bit of what your role looks like now, and then also kind of what that was like to get here.
Yeah. Well, we can go back as far as you want, but, I grew up in a really tiny town in Western Pennsylvania, out in the sticks, at the end of a dirt road, literally, in a house that my dad built, so I came from a really rural part of Pennsylvania. My parents were high school teachers, so we were always talking about ideas and stuff. But it wasn't, most of the kids I grew up with, their dads worked in the factory, and one of several factories around there. And so, I knew I was going to go to college. I knew I wanted to do that, and I had the grades for it. But I didn't know what I wanted to do. I certainly didn't know I wanted to be a scientist. But I got to Penn State, and my freshman year, I took this evolutionary anthropology seminar, this introduction to human evolution, and it just lit me on fire. Just what I found just mind blowing was just the whole perspective that you step outside yourself, you step outside even your species, and you ask, why is normal? Right? Why is it normal that we walk around on two legs and have hairless, sweaty skin and have these big, huge brains and talk to each other using language? And why is any of that normal? And of course, none of it is normal. It's all normal for us, but it didn't. It got that way through evolution. And so you take that evolutionary perspective to understand it's a whole new way of asking the question. Why are we here? How did we get here? And when I realized you could do that for a living as a professor, I thought, oh man, that's it for me. I got to give that a try. So it happens that Penn State had a really strong program in biological anthropology. Biological anthropology, evolutionary anthropology, people use different terms, same idea.
Okay.
And so, I had a really great undergraduate experience. I got to do research with Alan Walker and his lab. Alan Walker has found, he's passed away now, sadly, but his career is, legendary. He found all sorts of really important fossils, human fossils, in East Africa. He did work with living primates, really groundbreaking stuff. And so to be in his lab as an undergraduate was just, it was the best. Went to Harvard for graduate school, looked at locomotor energetics, how energy, the energy cost of walking and running, and how if people have, or for that matter, different species have different kinds of anatomy in their limbs, how does that affect the energy cost to walk or run a mile? That's putting people on treadmills, of course,
right.
But then also putting goats on treadmills to figure this out. dogs on treadmills and wiping hot dogs on the inside of VO2 masks so the dogs are happy to have them on so we can measure their breath as they run and walk on treadmills.
Are they pretty
So
compliant, or is it like literally herding goats?
Goats are tough. Goats are tough because they don't like anybody and they don't like you. And for good reason. We weren't doing anything mean to them, but nobody wants to kind of get taken off the nice grassy field that they were in, lazing in the sun, and be asked to sort of jog on a treadmill for a while. That's no fun, probably. So we weren't doing anything mean, but I don't think they enjoyed it. But the dogs were great because we used pet dogs, people's pets we knew.
Did they volunteered and brought them in?
Yeah. We asked if they'd be okay with it, and they, people were, and I got to tell you what we do. So you have to capture expired breath, right, to measure energy expenditure for walking and running on a treadmill to do it properly. And so you have to build these sort of plastic masks to like funnels, basically, that get hooked up to a vacuum system. So it pulls all the expired air away from their face and into this sensor. And for a human, you just wear the plastic mask. That's fun. And they make masks for people, of course, because, a lot of these tests are for people. But for other species, you got to get creative because there's no company out there that makes dog masks.
Right.
I mean, why would, right? That doesn't make any sense. And so, so what did I do? I bought I knew I had to figure this out. And so I went to the store and bought a 3-liter bottle of soda. I don't even know what the soda was. I dumped it out. And then I cut the end of it off. So I had this big funnel, basically, right? The spout of the 3-liter bottle, and plus the sort of half the body of the bottle. And it's big enough, the 3-liter size was big enough to fit over the heads of all the dogs in my study. And so I washed it out real well. And I put, attached clips to the side so we could clip to their collar so it could be held kind of loose, but, out of their way. It was clear so it wouldn't bug the dogs too much. They could see through it with no problem. And then the insight, things you learn in graduate school, the insight was, dogs were okay with it, but it's still, you feel bad. I don't want to bug them. You don't want them to be stressed when they're on the treadmill. So what I did is I bought a pack of hot dogs, and I would every new dog or every new time they were on the treadmill, I would wipe a hot dog on the inside of the mask.
So they're licking like crazy.
Oh, my gosh, they were just like in hot dog world. It was the best. And so they were really happy to be on the treadmill, actually. And we didn't do anything too crazy. It was just sort of walking and then trotting. So anyhow, so that was the kind of stuff I did in graduate school.
So hot dogs to up the compliance of the dog. So, and
that's right.
Yeah, that's really cool. So,
yeah. And
then from there, I've had the fortune to read your book, so I'm aware, but for our listeners, I mean, I'm getting ahead of myself, but your book Burn, it's about metabolism, but it's one of the most entertaining, I think it's the most entertaining science-focused book on metabolism, because there's a lot of books on metabolism for the layperson that might have these entertaining anecdotes, but to be written by a scientist about metabolism, you would think like you're ready for what might be a sedative. You're going to get into science, and you keep it so the opposite. Like I was like, the book came in the mail, I opened it, I'm standing at the kitchen counter, and I just started reading it, and I'm like just standing at the counter for like an hour. I didn't because I opened it to like flip through a few pages. And then I couldn't stop. And so my husband comes home. He's like, what are you doing? I'm like, just like standing there, and I'm like kind of stretching. I'm like, but I just couldn't put it down. And then like I found over dinner, I'm like recounting to him your anecdotes that you're sharing in the book. He's like, why are you telling me these stories? What is this? So you moved from, or I guess in addition to the goats, the dogs, chimpanzees, you also have like kind of found this group of people in Africa that you have studied.
Right. Yeah. Let's talk about that. So, so one of the big questions that I was actually trying to get at with the locomotor treadmill stuff in grad school as a piece of it, but that I was kind of have expanded in my career, has been focused on this last decade or so, is trying to understand how metabolism, total metabolism, all the calories you burn every day, and how your body brings in all these calories and burns them all off, how that's shifted over human evolution, not just for things like walking or running, but the whole budget, right? All the calories that come in and go out. How does that change, and how might it have changed? How do we understand it? And the reason we're so curious about this is in evolutionary anthropology is because humans have a whole bunch of really expensive, energetically expensive traits that are unique to us and make us human. Like, for example, best example is your brain, right? Human brains are 3 times bigger than ape brains, and they burn 3 times as many calories. And that's a lot. So your brain, you know, all you listeners out there, your brains are going to burn 300 kilocalories today, which is the equivalent of running a 5K. Right. So it's a huge amount of energy. And how does that's an evolutionary puzzle. How do you afford that, basically? How do you pay your bills? And to answer that question, I knew I needed data that weren't out there. They hadn't ever been measured. And I needed data on total daily energy expenditures, the total energy budget for apes, because if you want to compare humans evolutionarily, you need apes to compare to. And we didn't have any ape data. So we needed to get that. And I also knew that we needed to get data measurements for humans, you know, that were living in hunter-gatherer communities, because that's the lifestyle that we evolved in. And so I knew that if we were going to say anything evolutionarily relevant about humans, you know, the obvious critique, the obvious limitation, if we just did this in the States, would be, well, you know, that's not the kind of way that we evolved. That's not how that's not how our bodies evolved. And so, yeah, you can measure somebody in the US, but who's to say that tells us anything about the kind of ways that we evolved? And so I knew I needed both of those sets of data. We went out and have been able to get them over a whole bunch of crazy, fun, adventurous studies, which it's been such a fun 10 years getting all these data. But so that for the human hunter-gatherer piece, there aren't many hunter-gatherer communities left. Most have been moved, you know, to towns or villages or reservations and stuff. So one of the few are the Hadza community in northern Tanzania, and I had colleagues who work with them, and so I was able to arrange and get funding for a project there. And yeah, so we got funding. That took a while. Made plans, got permits, all the research permits, all the things you need to do. And yeah, you find yourself in northern Tanzania. You fly into Kilimanjaro Airport, spend a couple of days loading up the Land Rovers, because it's like a big camping trip. You're in the middle of the savannah. I mean, if you've seen those, it's like, it's the kind of wildlife documentaries I grew up watching as a kid. The great migrations on the savannah, the wildebeest and zebra. It's that landscape. And you're there. It's just kind of surreal. And yeah, you load up the Land Rovers with all your science kit and all your camping kit, because you're going to be out for weeks or even months. And then you kind of drive off. The paved roads turn to dirt roads. The dirt roads turn to tracks. The tracks disappear, and you're still driving.
Right.
And you're out there. And because I worked with Brian Wood, Dave Reichland as well, but Brian Wood has spent more nights in a Hadza camp than his own bed, I think, in the last 10 or 15 years.
And these are tents. It's
yeah, you're tenting. You're tenting when you go there. It's like a backpacking trip, kind of.
Are they small tents, like if you're camping maybe with your kids, or are they like larger tents that multiple people share, kind of like bunks in?
No, I mean, it's personal space is at a premium out there. So you like a small tent. I mean, so you can kind of have your own
right
at the end of the day, because everything else is shared.
Right.
Every other minute of your life out there is shared. So, to be able to sort of decompress mentally.
So this is small tent camping, sleeping bags, wildlife all around. There's not perimeters. You're not on a safari tour where you might have, large fences separating you. This is like you're in it.
No, that's right. That's right. And the Hadza are out in it too. So these camps, you get to a Hadza camp and it's maybe 6 or 10 grass houses, these sort of dome-shaped little grass houses that aren't much bigger than the tents that we set up for ourselves. And, maybe 30 or 40, around 30 or less usually, people out there.
How welcoming are they?
Oh my gosh, they're so generous and wonderful. It helps that Brian knows that community so well. I know folks there now too, not as well as Brian. He's spent so much time, but so if you roll up with Brian Wood, it's like showing up with Mick Jagger. They love Brian because they've had so many fun and good experiences with him, and we work really hard. We take it really seriously the responsibility for this to be a two-way street, to be a mutually beneficial relationship. And so we're not just going there to kind of take data home. We're going there to understand their community better. Part of what we do is to try to figure out, how we can help, if we can help them sort of maintain themselves as a viable, strong community. We've actually set up a charity to do that called the Hadza Fund.
I would imagine they have a lot of pride, because I'm sure
Yeah.
they're aware that other tribes like them are getting smaller and smaller. And like you said, there's very few that still exist in that purest form. So I would imagine there's
That's
a high
right.
level of pride with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the way to think about it is the thing that's most similar to them here in the States are communities like the Amish communities and Mennonite communities that still, of course they know about the outside world and they understand that they're different, and they take pride in that, right? And so, in Pennsylvania, not so much where I grew up exactly, but in other parts of Pennsylvania, you still have people living on farms driving horse and buggy, and that's and the cars are zipping past them on the roads. But so they understand about the outside world, but they keep their old ways, and the Hads are the same way, right? But now, so the Hads are interesting because the folks that are still hunting and gathering, and a large part of that community is, they don't have any crops or domesticated animals or guns or vehicles or electricity or plumbing. They live off the land, eating wild foods, hunting for wild game, collecting wild berries or wild tubers, root vegetables. Wild honey is a big part of their diet. The men hunt with bows and arrows that they make themselves. The women gather plant foods, berries, or dig with wooden digging sticks to get tubers. So it's a hard life, hard, physically demanding life.
As they're doing these, at times they're outfitted with these masks that you were talking about.
Let's talk about that. So how do you measure energy expenditures there? So we've done a few different things. So the main thing that we do, have done, I don't probably have gotten enough of these data. I'm not sure how much more we'll do with this community, but the main thing that we've done is measure energy expenditure, total daily energy expenditure, using a technique called doubly labeled water. So to use doubly labeled water, this is a technique that's used all the time in the US and Europe and other industrialized countries. It's the gold standard for measuring, calories per day, total calories per day, outside of a laboratory setting. And so what you do is you drink about half a glass of water, and it's enriched in two isotopes, deuterium, which is an isotope, a rare form of hydrogen, and oxygen-18, which is an isotope or a rare form of oxygen. And the person drinks this water, and then over the course of the next 7 or 10 days, you get a couple of urine samples over the course of those days, and you can actually watch them flush those isotopes out of their body water. The isotopes go into total diffusion, they equilibrate in their body water, and then they get flushed out as the person drinks regular water that is not enriched. And those isotopes get flushed out both as water, and then the O2, the oxygen molecule actually gets flushed out also as CO2. And so when you compare the rates at which those molecules get flushed out, the difference in the rate is how much CO2 you're making.
Wow. Okay.
So it's a really good measurement of how much CO2 the body makes. You can't make CO2 without burning calories. You can't burn calories without making CO2. So it's a really good measure, physiological measure of calories burned. So we don't have to estimate things or anything like that. We can do it that way. And it's really strongly validated in humans and other species. So it's the way to go. We do some mask-based things. So we bring a mask, like a briefcase-sized kit out there, where we can measure the energy cost of different activities, so we've done the energy cost of walking, and the energy cost of digging up tubers, and the energy cost of climbing into trees, because the men do that to get honey. So we've done those specific activity costs as well to kind of be able to understand how those contribute to the total energy budget, which we measure with the isotopes.
And the study that we're talking about that was published last fall was not specifically based on the Hadza research that you've done, but the Hadza research really, you're finding the same in this. And so it really just kind of validates even further the research that was in this past fall. And in that study, so the study that, we'll talk about that, and then I want to come back to the book. So all of this is sort of like when we're talking about, okay, we're studying metabolism. And I think there's something that so many of us, we hear it, we think about metabolism. Oh, how many calories do I burn? And it seems like it's very simple equations. And so I love, like, that's just like the smallest snapshot of what really goes into it. And the study that we're talking about, this was published in Science, the Journal of Science, this past fall. This was not just you were the lead author, but you collaborated with more than 80 other researchers.
Yeah.
And it was more than
That was
6,500 people that were.
in the study, 6,500 participants in the study. That's right. No, it was such an honor to be able to lead this one. This is a big collaborative effort. So these isotope-based data that we talked about, they're, it's hard to get them.
The doubly labeled water for metabolism.
Doubly labeled water, right? That's right. It's hard to do. You need a specialized lab that can do it, and it's expensive, right? The isotopically enriched water is expensive.
So say that I'm going to do this in over 6,000 people would be a tremendous
funding for that.
Right, and or the time, or how would you, Herman, like lead this? So, okay, so setting that up for this is giant.
You've got it exactly right. There would be no way to do it. And nobody had really done it. So people had done smaller studies. I think the largest one was a couple hundred subjects, which sounds like a lot, but it's not, because, once you try to understand how age affects things and how gender affects things and how body size affects things, you kind of split the sample up. And now you don't really have huge data, a lot of power to understand how these things work, how metabolism works. And we wanted to understand, how does metabolism change over the lifespan from birth until your very old age, people in their 90s. And so, it was a big collaborative effort led by folks like John Speakman and Klaus Westerterp and Bill Wong and Dale Scholler, Amy Luke, Jennifer Root, a bunch of folks, the Pennington Biomedical Research Center, which is down by you in Louisiana. Fantastic folks there. So, everybody collaborated and contributed, and it wouldn't have happened if that hadn't been the case. So it's a real win for collaborative science, which part of what I love about this project. And so you put all these data together, and what do you find? Well, if you look from age 8 days old up to people in their 90s, right, you can actually put together this roadmap of metabolism over the lifespan.
So you found that, like, you guys looked at, as you said, from age 8 to people in their 90s, and you're looking at, you're essentially accounting for the variation in muscle mass and body size. And the key findings, from the way that I understand it, is that while our metabolism fluctuates for all of us a little bit differently, there's similar patterns across all of us that are in these 4 very specific stages of life.
Yeah, that's right. So we've got everyone there, again, from 8 days after you're born up through people in their 90s. And so here's what we find. If you look at the total calories per day, right, the first thing you notice, and this is no surprise, is bigger people burn more calories, right? That your metabolism is all the work that all your cells do all day. And so when you've got more cells, because you're bigger, you do more work. And so, of course, if you're bigger, you burn more calories. And so the biggest predictor of how many calories you burn every day is just body size. Tiny little babies don't burn anywhere near as much energy every day as big adults. Okay, but now let's try to get a pound for pound measure, right? And ask, for a given body size, do you have a fast metabolism or a slow metabolism? Are you burning more energy than we'd expect, more calories, or fewer calories than we'd expect for your size, right? So when we do that, it gets really interesting, because what we find is that babies are born with a kind of pound for pound, a size adjusted to energy expenditure that's similar to adults. They burn, right after birth, you burn energy like a tiny adult, which kind of makes sense, because you're part of mom,
right,
as you're during pregnancy, and so you're burning calories like that too. Your metabolism is like that too. In that sense, it's understandable. It's actually really strange in another sense, because when we look across species, tiny species like squirrels burn energy really fast, pound for pound, compared to things like elephants, which burn energy much more slowly on a pound for pound basis, right? Elephants burn more calories per day than mice, but pound for pound, mice burn their energy much more quickly. And so you might expect newborn babies to have fast metabolism, but they don't. They're born like a tiny adult.
Almost like mirroring the metabolism of their mother.
Exactly. But then something kicks in, and we would love to know what this is, but something kicks in and your metabolism rockets up. And so by the time you're 1 year old, the metabolism is 50% higher than we'd expect for your body size, right? It's way, way high.
So pound for pound.
Pound for pound. And then slowly from about 1 year old, it stays pretty high for a couple of years and then slowly comes down and doesn't reach this adult level until you're about 20 years old. So there's this first period of raising metabolism, second long period of slowly declining metabolism.
And that's through 8, 9, 10, through your teens to 20.
Yeah.
And I believe from what I read in the study, it averages about 2.8, you could say roughly 3% a year. Metabolism slows until age 20.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And then at age 20, it is just rock solid, steady up until you're 60.
Which is mind blowing for people.
That's a big surprise.
Yes.
Yeah. Me too. I mean, I'm in my 40s and nobody was more surprised than me that your metabolism doesn't slow down because it feels like it does. But, we've got thousands of people measured over this period. This is probably more studies have been done in this age group than any other. And so this is the best understood age group. These are rock solid data and there's just no change.
And we'll be talking, Herman and I will be talking a little bit more in the why and like the what we can do about it.
Yeah.
But like to just put it out there, from age 20 to age 60, our metabolism is largely holding steady, which I think everyone listening is like, there's absolutely no way, because even people in their late 20s are convinced that things are starting to slow down. I know that people in their 30s are like, oh, that person in their 20s can eat anything. And in their 40s, the same. And so that I think was the biggest surprise. But then, so finishing out that after age 60, what happens? So 20 to 60, you're rock solid.
And then it begins to slow down again. After age 60, and that decline is slow but steady. So it's about 7% a decade, right? So that means by the time you're in your 90s, you're burning, and this is already adjusted for size because people also lose muscle mass and that kind of stuff, right? So this is not that. In addition to getting smaller, as a lot of people do in their elderly years, their cells are just slowing down, and so their size adjusted metabolism is about 20-25% slower when they're in their late 80s, early 90s, than it was when they were in their late 50s, early 60s.
And that's size adjusted. So the fact that they actually often are smaller, it might even be more than 20, 25% less.
Yeah.
And I think we see that, especially with, older people that we would think of in our lives. We realize, maybe our grandfather or grandmother they don't seem to eat much, or, they eat such small amounts or whatever. Or people will even comment, my appetite isn't what it used to be. So those thoughts that I think that we have that, I'm getting older, my metabolism is slowing, until you're 60, that's not the case. But if our listeners, if you're over 60, okay, you've got something there. But so let's talk about that. This is a couple of things that I was really interested to see is, and I'm going to recap this like really quickly. So when a baby is born, that metabolism right at first mirrors the mother's, but then very quickly that metabolism just like revs up until it's about 50% more than the average adult pound for pound. And that holds for that first year, but from about age 1 till 20, so through the, younger years, grade school through teens, it's gradually dropping just under 3% a year. And then, so at age 20, most people would be burning fewer calories than they did at age 15, for example. As someone might be leaving college, they might be burning fewer calories than when they started college. So you could maybe start to notice a shift, but then you're holding steady, that metabolism's holding steady literally for the next 4 decades, 40 years, from age 20 till about 60. There's not a significant shift that you're seeing. And then after age 60, that slow decline, like you said, 7% per decade, less than 1% a year. So that's kind of just a recap. Now, this is but looking at basal metabolic rate, which is the calories that we burn essentially just at rest. But this is also taking into account total daily energy expenditure.
Yeah, it's everything.
Which is like how much you're exercising, if you're moving, if you're doing that spin class or that boot camp. This is taking all of, if you're the Hadsta population that's climbing trees for honey, you saw this with them that sort of
Yeah, they're in
affirmed
there
this.
too.
Yeah.
That's right. That's
Which was
right.
stunning.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that crazy? And I should say, just to, that pattern of expenditure changing over the lifespan, we see that in BMR as well. Your resting expenditure does the same thing. And so, this isn't just, oh, you're really active when you're a kid, and then you're not active when you're an adult, and then you're less active when you're an older adult. That's not what's happening. I mean, that probably contributes some, perhaps, but that's not what's happening here. This is your cells and how active they are. So this is not that. This is not physical activity. I mean, that the physical activity is going to be some part of this, although we can talk about how much I don't think it's a big part of this. But that could be contributing. But this is something that's happening at a deeper level. This is your cells speeding up when you're little and slowing down when you're really old, and holding steady in middle age.
And when the research that was published this past fall did not include specifically the research on the Hadza tribe. Yet you and I talked earlier, and you said that if we took someone from, your hometown, my hometown, and we took someone in that same age, same body size, accounting for all the variables factored in, the total daily energy expenditure, the total calories burned per day, also including movement and exercise, would be similar to someone in the Hadza tribe.
Yeah, that was a huge surprise. So when you work with the Hadza, the reason we went there is to figure out how many calories they burn, and we thought it would be really high because they're so physically active. In fact, they get more activity. We've measured this with accelerometry and stuff. They get more activity in a day than most Americans get in a week.
Not surprisingly, so right?
Yeah, I mean, they work for a living, and so we thought they'd have really high expenditures. The huge surprise was that when we got those data back from the isotope-based, the doubly labeled water measurements, they're the same as everybody else. They're the same as adults in the US and Europe and other industrialized countries. And that's after you account for body size and account for, body fat percentage and age and sex and all these things. Control for whatever you like. Daily energy expenditures are the same, indistinguishable in the Hadza community versus industrialized communities. So that tells us that you can be 5 to 10 times more physically active, and we're not going to see that show up in your daily energy expenditure. And what's interesting is, so that was mind blowing for me, and it's not what we expected going in. And so we've spent a lot of the last 10 years trying to track this down and see, first of all, is it just the Hadza? Maybe that's something's strange with them, or who knows?
And I want to kind of clarify. So let's just say someone that was my body size, again, accounting for all of that. And let's say that let's just say a person who is maybe relatively sedentary American, and their main thing is they wake up, they get in their car, they park in their parking garage, they work, they come home, they're on the sofa, and they're pretty sedentary, but based on their, body size, et cetera, let's say they burn 2,500 calories. It would have seemed like with that really significant increase in movement and physical activity that the Hadza tribe has, you could have expected double the calories, 5,000 or 7,000 calories a day.
There have been crazy estimates out there,
right?
But certainly,
but that's not at all
3,000, 4,000. I mean, something we definitely have the precision in this technique to measure a much higher expenditure. So, for example, men and women in this community are walking, and this is just the walking, something between maybe 5 miles a day, maybe 10 miles a day. It's a lot. Depends on the individual. So that's right there is, anywhere from 250 to 500 calories a day that we should be able to just from walking. And then that when they're going and they've got a kid on their back and they're digging in the dirt to get tubers and they're chopping into trees to get honey. I mean, it's not just the walking. And so we should definitely see an elevation of, a few hundred calories a day easily, maybe much more. And we don't see any of that. We see completely indistinguishable daily calories.
So talking about why, because that seems discouraging to people. It would seem like,
no, I know.
Well, so then, but we want to say there's also so many other benefits of that movement that we're going to be talking about. So we don't want to say exercise doesn't matter. However, when we look at how much does it affect metabolism, that's where this conversation comes in.
Yeah, that's right. So, and that's what that's how this work was reported a lot when the hottest stuff came out in 2012. The clickbait headlines were "Don't bother exercising."
That had to drive you crazy.
Which we never said, and in fact, we really tried to be really clear that exercise is still really important. It just isn't important in the way we think. So the way that exercise is often sold and promoted is it's going to boost your metabolism. You're going to burn all those extra calories. And when you burn all those extra calories, you're going to lose weight. Now, it's interesting because we've actually known from lots of work, not in my lab, this is other work in other labs, that exercise is actually a pretty tough tool to use to lose weight. You can do it. You got to really, the levels of exercise you have to maintain are pretty high. And you can, and people have different results. But as a general rule, we've known for decades that exercise is not a great tool by itself for weight loss. So actually, these data seem to align with that, right? But people don't want to hear that or get upset. Okay, what's happening? First of all, I just want to say it's not just the Hadza. We've seen this in other populations since that work. We've done this in other subsistence populations, foragers and farmers in South America and other places. It's not just the Hadza. This seems to be around the world, different populations, their activity levels don't correspond to their energy expenditures. We see the same thing in exercise intervention studies. There's a great study done recently by folks near you at the Pennington Biomedical Research Center, led by Corby Martin, fantastic researcher, well-designed study, enrolled people in an exercise program that, so they're doing supervised exercise and they know how much they're making them work. They know how many calories a day they're burning from the exercise. And then, and they measure their total expenditure before they start the exercise program and then 6 months in. And even at 6 months in, which is not that long for your body to adjust, but even at 6 months in, they're not burning all the calories they should be per day based on how much workload you've given them with the exercise, right? Their body is finding ways to shave those calories off. And so at 6 months in, their calorie expenditure per day is not just what it was at baseline plus the exercise. It's less than that. The body has figured out ways to save energy in other aspects of its physiology. Now, what are those other aspects? We'd love to know. This is an area of really intense research right now. Here's what we think is going on. We know that when you exercise, people who exercise a lot, they have lower levels of inflammation. And so inflammation is immune activity that you need to do to respond to an infection. But if it's high all the time, that's bad. So you reduce those baseline levels of inflammation, you can save calories that way. We know that people who exercise a lot have a sort of less of a response to stress, right? So cortisol levels don't go up as high. Adrenaline levels don't go up as high. There's a great study looking at women who had sort of mild depressive symptoms, and they were enrolled in a program where they either had talk therapy for part of the study or talk therapy plus jogging. A few times a week they went for a jog, nothing too crazy. And in the jogging part of the study, their bodies produced 30% less cortisol and 30% less adrenaline over the course of a day than it did when they only had the talk therapy. And their depressive symptoms got better too, by the way. So, great reasons to exercise that have nothing to do with burning more calories. Reproductive hormones get into a sort of probably a more normal range if you exercise. If you're really sedentary, your levels are probably higher than maybe they would be normal in a hunting and gathering or farming community. And so, we know that exercise is really good in terms of protecting you from reproductive cancers like breast cancer and cervical cancer and prostate cancer. So, basically what I'm saying is your body's adjusting, and it's adjusting to save calories and other tasks. That's the hypothesis. That's what we think is going on. And those adjustments are really good for you, actually, incredibly good for you and important. And reasons that exercise is so incredibly good for your health. This adjustment is part of that. Not the only thing, but it's part of why exercise is so good for you. Even if, it kind of makes it more difficult to lose weight with exercise, it's actually one of the reasons exercise is so good for you. So, we got to think about exercise and diet as sort of two different tools for two different jobs. exercise is really good for health overall. And, it's the energy that's coming in. It's the diet that's going to be your best tool for trying to manage your weight.
I think people have maybe also instinctively known that, or if they're really kind of tuned in and paying attention to things, not understanding it to the extent that you just shared. But as dietitians, we're well aware that someone says, "Oh, I'm doing a 30-minute workout each day," and we're like, "That's fantastic." Whether it's a walk, whatever. There's 24 hours in a day. There's a lot of time we can eat away the progress that we're making through exercise. And so, I think that we do see often that someone starts an exercise program, they're disappointed because they don't lose weight. And, one of the things that it's a constant challenge is to have that messaging out there that weight isn't our only measure of success. There's all these other measures of success. When someone's doing any type of a quote weight loss program or exercise program. And so looking at how are you sleeping? How's your stress levels? All of these other things that are going to be side benefits. So it sounds like what you're saying is the very reasons that our metabolisms are sort of, our bodies are saving calories in certain areas. When we up our exercise, we up our physical activity, our body is accommodating by, saving or kind of turning down that energy expenditure in other tasks. And those areas that it seems like we might be dialing back calories burned in our body, also many of these appear to be really beneficial, like helping with our stress response, helping with our immune system, the reproductive hormones. All of these things are really good things. And they may also be part of the culprit of why our metabolisms aren't just soaring.
That's exactly right. You said it very well. Yeah, I that's how I see it.
So when we look at, and as you said, you have to be honest with people. Exercise doesn't appear to be the best tool for weight loss. If your sole goal is weight loss, you don't want to rely on simply exercise for that. I was actually on a work call yesterday and a guy said, "Yeah, I've been doing this workout. We have a workout challenge at our gym at Oshner Fitness Center now, and it's called the Get Fit Challenge, FITT." Mm-hmm. And, he was kind of lamenting that he hadn't lost any weight yet, but he's shown up for every workout. And, there was a lot to share, and I didn't get into it with the conference call that everybody else was on, but I was thinking these exact things that that's only one element of it. So when we look at that, there's a lot that we don't want anyone to dial back the movement that you've been incorporating into your diet, that's that balanced physical movement. Like we want to absolutely keep that, but realizing that this doesn't automatically make that weight loss happen. But these changes that your body is making are really good for us. And what you've said to me is that the important message for this is when it comes to diet and nutrition, and it comes to that physical activity, the most important thing is that you can't trade one for the other.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's the thing that bothers me about the way that public health messaging is sort of set right now is, you look at the CDC fact sheet on obesity or the WHO or any of these public health guidelines, and they'll tell you if you want to prevent obesity, you got to watch your diet and exercise. And I don't disagree with either of those goals. But the way it's framed is that it's kind of an either or, and that, one's as good as the other if you don't want to do both. And that they're both equally good for weight loss. And none of that I don't think is true. I think diet is clearly better for weight loss. I think exercise is important for everything else. And, it's you hear people talking about, well, I'm going to go run this morning so I can earn my donut. I'm going to be able to have my donut for breakfast because I went for a run in the morning. It doesn't work that way. I wish it did. I love donuts too. I wish it did, but it doesn't. And we do people a disservice when we talk about it that way. Or you see things like, you see exercise programs for kids, make sure they're getting their physical activity, which they should. Absolutely, they should. But then you can't say, well, because they did that, because they had gym today, they can have the sugary beverages and we don't have to worry about what they're feeding them at lunch because we absolutely have to worry about that. That's, diet and exercise are two different tools for two different jobs. And we have to be really clear on that, I think, if we want to make any headway on these, frankly, on the diseases that we're all most likely to die from, right? Heart disease, diabetes, cardiometabolic disease generally, obesity-related diseases are the leading killers. not just in the US, but globally. And even in the middle of an infectious disease pandemic like COVID, which has killed millions, the tragedy of COVID, still more people will die this year from cardiometabolic disease than will die from infectious disease. And so, not that it's not either or, we have to do both well, infectious disease and these things, but we can't take our eye off the ball, I think, on how we treat and think about non-communicable disease.
And when you talked about exercise, the idea of someone incorporating the guy I was just talking about, incorporating exercise solely with that goal of losing weight, the negative there can be a bunch of things, that you're not having that whole health benefit that we would if we made the nutritional changes, but also that it can feel incredibly discouraging. It feels like you're a failure. You feel like you may not be doing enough, or you're doing it wrong. And so realizing that going into it, we want to incorporate exercise. For me, exercise and movement there's so much of a psychological benefit, just that mental, spiritual benefit that I get, that is just such a release there. And the things that are how we process stress, how we handle stress, all of these things, I look at that movement as that. Anyone who knows me knows, I'm such a fan of a walk and talk, as much as we can get moving while we're also doing the other things we need to do in our day.
Yeah.
And not from a calorie burn. It's not that I'm burning these calories so I can eat fill in the blank, but it's that whole health approach of what it's doing with our insulin levels, our glucose levels, our stress levels. All of this is going to be benefited. So let's talk about, for the people who are still stuck on, holy crap, from 20 to 60, I'm burning the same. This can't be true.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the reasons, why are people seeing the weight gain? And because I think that when we would say, people would, I think, put large sums of money on the line, that this is fact, that metabolism slows in your 30s, 40s, 50s. I think people would put their house on that. They would be so convinced. I could
meet those people someday. That'd be great. It makes you bet.
Right. Yeah. So let's talk about why, what are some of couple of the main reasons that we do see this kind of insidious weight gain through those decades?
Yeah. Well, so again, it's really hard to budge your metabolism. That seems to be kind of beyond our controls. Your body's going to burn what it burns, and it seems to burn the same from 20 to 60. So that tells us that the issues with obesity and weight gain aren't the energy that we're burning off, because that dial is stuck. It has to be the energy that's coming in, and that is what we eat. And so, the question, I think we can frame it usefully, is asking, why is it that we're overeating throughout our middle age? And we don't even notice it. We don't even feel like we are, right? Because that's the surprise. I don't think I'm overeating. I don't think I've changed my diet, and here I am gaining weight. Well, I don't have any answers right now. I think we've just been able to kind of focus this, I think, and ask this question and really frame it well with this study. But here's what I think we do know. The regulation in your brain of how hungry you feel and how full you feel, that seems to dictate how many calories you bring in. And we know it can affect that. Stress can affect that. Hormonal changes can affect that. So we're not saying that hormones don't change, because they do, right? Your testosterone levels decrease from your 20s and through your 50s if you're a guy. They do if you're a woman too, but they're lower to begin with. Estrogen levels also, and progesterone levels change if you're a woman all through your 20s, 30s, and 40s. And of course, at menopause, they're quite low. And so hormones change. That can change how you feel. Stress levels change. I think that we just have to kind of face that. My stress levels are higher. I know they are. I've got 2 kids and a job and a mortgage, and they're not the same as they were when I was 20 years old in grad school. They're just not. And at the same time, my income's higher. So I do the shopping, and I have to work really hard to make sure I don't put a bunch of stuff in my grocery cart that's not good for me.
The right? Self-soothers, right?
Yeah. And so my sleep's not as good, my stress level's higher, and all these things push us to overconsume. The foods that we surround ourselves with don't help. And so I think, that's where I'd point the finger.
And looking at that slow gain, you've noted that people often gain about half a pound a year. It's really slow. And so when you and I were talking about this kind of in our little pre-interview huddle, one thing that you pointed out was, okay, why does it look like all of a sudden in your 30s you're gaining 5 pounds? Well, maybe it wasn't 5 pounds all of a sudden in your 30s and another 5 in your 40s. But if it's that half a pound a year, you may not even really realize it until it has hit that 5 pounds or 10-pound mark consistently.
Yeah, I think that's right. And people, you fluctuate even as you're sort of slowly gaining. That's a roller coaster of a ride. Even for most folks, you're up a pound and down a pound and up a pound and down a pound, up a pound and a half, down a pound.
Right.
Wait a second, and you kind of you can not notice or tell yourself it's just temporary and you're not really gaining the weight. I think that happens to a lot of people.
And that slow gain.
You're probably going to say it better than me. There's that slow gain is just, it's a tiny mismatch between the energy coming in and the energy burning off. Your brain's really good at matching the calories you bring in and burn off. And so it's such a subtle thing. And it's below your conscious control. Your brain, these systems that are making this match, the energy in and energy out match, are beyond your conscious control. And so I think it's slow and subtle and insidious. And the way that we kind of talk about it and describe it might not really match kind of the pattern of which it happens.
And some of that can be just lifestyle changes. It could be, someone has more financial security and they're going out to restaurants more. Or it may be seasonal gain. It may be that 2-week vacation you take every year. You put on a couple of pounds and you drop most of them when you're back to your normal lifestyle, but maybe not all. Could be holiday weight gain that, you put, 3 or so pounds over the holidays and then maybe 2.5 comes off, as you get back into your normal routine. So that slow gain, there's a lot of reasons we may see that slow gain, but the tendency is about half of a pound a year. So when you look at, that slow gain that we may not realize until it's gotten to that 5, 10 or more mark, the hormonal change that, as you said, the hormonal changes that can happen with men and women, they're not really affecting our metabolism, but they can affect our energy, our vitality, how much energy we are putting into our workouts, our muscle mass, etc. And then, as you said, stress levels changing, and we feel more stressed. Our sleep might be influenced negatively as we get older, and of course, sleep is tied in with our weight. The distractions, eating to self-soothe, eating as this stress release. There's all these things that can come in, and then one of the things that I see too is as people get into their late 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, the social outing is often long dinners with friends and dinners with wine, with food, and, sitting at the table for hours, just catching up with friends. And that might be a very different pastime than you had in your early 20s.
Yeah, I think all of that's right. Speaking, I've had a chance with this book and just in my work to talk to people like yourself, dietitians and nutritionists who are out there, trying to help people with weight. I'm not a clinician, I'm really clear about that, right? I'm not in that space. But one thing I've heard again and again is that people are, part of the issues with people gaining weight, or what is they need to think about is, am I eating because I'm hungry, or am I eating because it's time? I'm eating because it's 9 o'clock and I want to watch TV and have a beer, right? And I'm not even hungry, but that's just part of my day. And you call it self-soothing or whatever. And I think that's probably right. So it's not even just a matter of sort of hunger and satiety. It's a matter of just these kind of behavioral patterns we build for ourselves.
So when we look at the why in that four decade span, are we seeing the weight change that we're convinced it's our metabolism, that slow gain, possibly that hormonal change, how we're reacting to stress, and it's what we're eating and what we're putting in that maybe we're not so aware of it. So when we look at the solution, it's really paying closer attention to, as you refer to it, our food environment. What are we surrounding ourselves with? And what are the things that we know are going to nourish our bodies well and not lead us to have more of the, roller coaster of energy or kind of elicit more cravings. One thing that I see a lot is when we are looking for turning to food as that kind of numbing out or that stress release. I call it people's witching hours, that time, like right when they get in after work or late at night. Yeah. It's often carbs and things that are kind of that carb, fat, salt that people are reaching for as that. You usually don't hear people say, oh my God, I couldn't stop eating that chicken. It's just not it. Right. It's usually going to be something that's right. a carb-based. And so talk to us just a quick bit. I've talked about this before on this podcast, but sort of how that drives our brain's pleasure centers, our reward centers.
Absolutely. Well, I want to start. Let me start back in Hadza because that's where a lot of my kind of perspective on this comes from. When we first came out with the Hadza work, people like Gary Taubes reached out to me and said, "Well, that's interesting that they're not burning any more calories than everybody else is, but the obesity isn't about calories anyway. It's about carbs, or it's about the kinds of foods you're eating." And I thought, well, that's interesting. But if carbs are the villain, nobody's told the Hadza this, right? They get about 65% of their calories from carbohydrates, and they get a large percentage of their calories from honey, which is just sugar and water, and actually, if you look across other hunter-gatherer groups, other subsistence groups, a lot of them are very heavily carb-based. The only ones you get that are sort of meat-heavy are in the Arctic. And so, it's a strange thing. The paleo diet these days has become synonymous with low-carb, keto stuff. And if you actually work with hunter-gatherers, that's a joke.
Right, right.
The idea that it's low-carb. And then there's also, again, I'm an anthropologist, right? I study people. The diversity of human experience around the globe, I think, is something that's always on my mind. And I try to understand, I have a pretty wide view of what it means to be human and what it means to be, quote unquote, normal. And if you look across the world today, diets are hugely diverse, right? Some are very carb heavy, some are less so. All sorts of different flavor profiles and everything else. And so, I just have a really hard time squaring that perspective on diet and the diversity of human diet, and for that matter, the carb heaviness of a lot of human diets, with this view that there are these villains out there, lurking in our foods, and there's this one bad thing is carbs, or this bad thing is. I think actually these different macronutrients or even flavorings can be okay on their own, but there's something about the way that we combine them. I think you're absolutely right. The way that we build our junk food, and we build it in a factory, right? Let's be clear about this. These engineered junk foods that we build ourselves and have focus group tested, they do that combination of fats and salts and carbs. Yeah, I agree. It seems to light us up in a way that our brains aren't really ready for. Stephen Guyenet has done a lot of nice work on this. There's a book called The Hungry Brain. I'd recommend to anybody who wants to know this better. But if you look at the data, the actual controlled feeding studies, where people live in a metabolic ward for months and are fed particular diets, so we know exactly what they're eating. Kevin Hall's done amazing work on this. If people eat, ultra processed foods with all the flavorings and all that stuff, they overconsume. And if you eat whole foods, unprocessed foods, even if it's matched carb for carb and protein for protein, they don't overconsume. They actually eat a little bit less than they need. And that makes sense with this idea that our reward systems, these evolved reward systems in our brain, never evolved to contemplate a Dorito, right? Or a donut, right? Those are completely foreign, made up foods. And guess what? Who engineered them? Somebody else with a brain just like yours that knows exactly what's delicious and impossible to resist. And so, it's kind of like we've let the monkeys build the zoo here. We're the monkeys, and we built our own zoos. We're the apes, I should say. And guess what? The food environments that we build are completely delicious and irresistible. Of course they are. Of course they are, right? And they're also, so it just becomes really hard to say no, and it becomes too easy to overconsume. One of the things that really strikes me with all this work on diet and obesity and the regulation of that is that, the work that's been done on the genetics of obesity, there's hundreds of genes now where the variants of those genes are known. If you have this variant versus that one, would make you more likely to struggle with your weight or have a higher BMI. All of those genes identified to be related to BMI are all active in your brain, right? So this isn't an issue of your fat cells, your insulin, or pancreas, or any of that stuff that's sort of pushing you to overconsume. It's that regulation system in your brain, the reward and hunger and fullness, how those get rewarded and signaled in your brain. Those are getting that's what's not quite able to handle it. And it's pretty darn good. It's matching, even if you're gaining a pound a year, that system is matching intake and expenditure to within less than 1/10 of a percent. It's incredibly good, but it's not perfect. And it's not perfect because it's getting pushed by these crazy new engineered foods that we've never been able to experience as a species before.
And so being aware that these are the things that maybe some people can feel like as if it has that hold over them or that grip. You throw a Cheez-It in front of people and it's just irresistible for them.
I agree.
For that. And so realizing that, okay, when we look at what are the things that are in our control, our food environment, the things that we're choosing, what we're putting in our cart, and it doesn't have to be the latest trendy fill in the blank diet. We're talking real whole foods, period. And if you are focusing on nourishing your body with primarily those, and you focus on what is the good, the nutritious things that I'm putting in, then it edges out the other stuff more. So I think it doesn't have to be about what you're not having.
I think that's right. And, different diets are going to work, better or worse for different people. You should feel free. I'm not a dietitian, but in my perspective, I would say you should feel free to experiment and see what combination of foods. Obviously, you want to keep with healthy foods and worry about things like vitamins and minerals as well as not just carbs and calories. But the foods that make you feel full on a healthy number of calories to keep you at a healthy weight, that's the way to go. And so, we know from work looking at what is it about foods that make you feel full? Protein helps make you feel full, right? That's why nobody overeats the chicken, because you kind of can't eat that much chicken breast, and then you're like, I'm kind of done. Fiber helps you feel full, and so beans, legumes, other plant foods that are high fiber often make you feel full on less. Beans are great because they're protein and fiber both. And so we know how to do this. The question is two things. There's the societal food environment that you encounter when you walk into a supermarket, and I don't know if we're going to be able to change that anytime soon. That's hard to change. But then there's the food environment that we come home with and we stock our cupboards with, and we do have control over that. And it's hard to be good, but that's where I think we have to start.
So it doesn't go back to anything that is a magic one-shot tool here. It goes back to those things that in our core, we know this. So being mindful of our food environment, being mindful of movement, daily movement. And again, not that movement alone is going to help you rev your metabolism, but all these other benefits of it that you're going to get. Yeah. And the more muscle mass you have, the more calories you're going to burn. So looking at exercise for that. Sleep, alcohol, keeping these things in check, because of course those are going to be impaired sleep. We're going to crave more. The more we drink, we're looking at calories. It can also affect the foods that we choose. So when we're talking about why do we have that little half pound a year gain, these are all things that are in our control that we can kind of look at.
Yeah. So, I think this, again, for me, it comes down to thinking about diet and exercise as two different tools for two different jobs. Diet to focus on weight and exercise for everything else.
It's that simple. But keeping both of them as a key priority. I really appreciate your insight on this. When I read the study, it was fascinating. I reached out to you just kind of like, let me just see if Dr. Pontzer is available. And then I was just like, wow, the more I read, the more I was just really fascinated by your research. And so really honored that you took the time and walking us through on this. And it's in such a fun, candid way as well. And then the last thing to kind of wrap up, I'm going to post the link to your book, Burn. This was your first book that you wrote.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's an undertaking because it's combining entertaining stories with science, as you said earlier. How was it, that process?
Well, that book is just my brain spelled out onto a few hundred pages, right? This is what I think about. It's what I like to talk about. I love that my work takes me to these great, fun places and meet these great, fun people. And I love to share those stories and share the science, not just, the take-home punchline messages about what we learned, but also how we got there, how we learned it. I think that's an important piece of the science too, and it gives important context, and it's just fun for me. So if the fact that some of that fun came through in the written book, warms my heart, because that's the reason I did it was to be able to share that.
Yeah, it's really incredible. So for our listeners, the Dr. Pontzer's book, Burn, and I'll link again to it in the episode notes. It is an excellent resource to learn more about the why behind this research that we've been talking about today. And the last thing I want to ask you, there is a phrase that the Hadza community uses that means no worries. Tell me how to pronounce it.
Hamnashita.
That's what I thought. So it's Hamna. Second word is Shida. So Hamnashita.
Yeah.
And do they kind of run it all together as one word almost?
Yeah. It's like no worries, man.
Hamnashita.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So I am embracing that as my new mantra as well. So Hamnashita.
Yeah, Hamnashita. That's how you should go through life and keep an even perspective on everything.
So anybody, if you hear me just kind of saying that under my breath or like repeating it to myself, I don't know what it is. Hamnashita. All right. Thank you, Herman. I'm really grateful. This has been a blast, and I have a feeling I'll be reaching out to you for more interviews as more publications come out and we can continue to learn from you.
I can't wait. That sounds great.
Right,
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. See ya. What a pleasure to spend this time with Dr. Herman Pontzer. I loved it, soaked it all up. I'll include the links that he and I talked about in the show notes of this episode, again, including the link to his book, Burn. And let me know what you think. It's a lot. It's a lot to kind of process, and it undoes some of these assumptions that we have held as fact. But I think it's fascinating, and it helps us to understand our bodies a bit more. It helps us to give ourselves some grace in these areas that maybe we've been beating ourselves up on, and also kind of highlights to us the areas that maybe to spend a little bit more time focusing on, to put as more of a priority. So always let me know what you think. Let me know if you've made some changes based on this that have been beneficial to you. You know that I always love to hear about it. I am registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. And if you would like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com, and you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. And join us next week for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life.